Hi, everybody. My name is Lizzie Bowden. I'm the Adult Services Manager at the North Riverside Public Library, and I am joined today with Troy Swanson from the Moraine Valley Community College, and he is here to talk to us about fake news and misinformation before this upcoming 2020 presidential election. And so he's here to tell us what Bigfoot can teach us about fake news. And so, hi, Troy. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
And so please tell me, what can Bigfoot tell us about fake news?
Yeah, so, well, to get started, let's just talk about Bigfoot and just get kind of the lay of the land with Bigfoot himself or herself. And so, who is Bigfoot? Bigfoot is a large, ape-like creature that lives mostly in the western United States and has been with us for a number of years. There's hundreds, thousands of eyewitness accounts. There's famous videos, footprints, hair samples, legends of Sasquatch living with Native Americans before Europeans had arrived in the United States. If you do a search, there's actually a Bigfoot registry. Like, literally, Bigfoot has been spotted in every state of the union. Well, almost every state. I guess I don't know about Hawaii and Alaska, frankly. I'm sure he's in Alaska, maybe not in Hawaii. But we see Bigfoot all the time. The thing with Bigfoot that people don't think about, right, is that ape-like creatures live in tropical climates. They don't live in temperate climates, and they definitely don't live in cold mountainous climates, such as the western United States. Also, if you go through the fossil record, so if Bigfoot has been with us for hundreds of years, we find no evidence of Bigfoot in the fossil record. There's no skeletons. There's no preserved Bigfoot creatures over time, right? So if Bigfoot is real, there needs to be a population density, enough of them to reproduce and survive. But for some reason, we don't find them. When you're out hiking in Colorado, you don't say, "Oh, there's a dead Bigfoot. I have to step over this Bigfoot," right? They don't exist. They only are like in the shadows and in the corner, out of the corner of your eye. If you think about the experts out there, there are very, very few. I won't say there's none. There are very, very few anthropologists who will say that Bigfoot is real. Probably like 99% of them will say no, or biologists, zoologists. There are a few supporters. There's one guy from the University of Washington, Dr. Grover Krantz, famously made a career studying Bigfoot and saying Bigfoot was real, but he's sort of about it. Like, you don't really find any experts out there. Most others say Bigfoot doesn't exist, right? Mm-hmm. So if we have this evidence, the question is, like, why do we find Bigfoot? Why is Bigfoot out there? And how do we weigh that evidence against each other? And go ahead, sure.
Well, I was just going to say, kind of given all of that, given that it's like so much evidence to the contrary, why do so many people see Bigfoot?
Right. Yeah, so that's the question, right? Right. The key thing is, Bigfoot is an answer that's awaiting evidence, which kind of ties us into our fake news world that we live in. So do we see Bigfoot? No. But do we see a lot of things out in the world that we don't have an explanation for? We hear noises. We see something that we can't explain. We get scared and our emotions take over. We're out camping, or we're out hiking, or we're in our backyard and we hear something that we don't know about. And what happens is Bigfoot becomes that explanation. I saw Bigfoot, and that's a way that I give myself evidence. I give myself justification. I give myself a story to tell. And you can substitute all kinds of things around the world. There's many folklore myths, things like aliens, witches for many years. Bigfoot's sort of new, but in European tradition, we have seen witches and demons for thousands of years, right, in the kind of Judeo-Christian tradition. And so those things also substitute for stories that help us explain our world, right? So Bigfoot's a fun mystery. It makes for some good TV, makes for some exciting camping trips. But unfortunately, Bigfoot is not real. So the key thing is, like, we need to think about evidence. And there's an old saying by physicist Richard Feynman, right, is the first principle of any scientific investigation, the first principle is you must not fool yourself, right? You bring your own biases into a situation, and you are the easiest person to fool. And so sometimes something will happen, and there's people that say they see Bigfoot, and I think they believe it, and I don't mean to disparage that belief, But the reality is you can tell yourself that this thing was real and make yourself believe it. And there's a lot of psychology out there, a lot of evidence that shows how malleable our memory is and how we can convince ourselves that we saw this thing that maybe isn't really there, right? And that there's sort of a spectrum of anything that we believe, a spectrum of belief, I would say, where you have like the pro Bigfoot believers on one end and the skeptics and the non-believers on the other end, and all of us fall somewhere in between, maybe some neutral people in the middle. And when we come to any topic, whether it's Bigfoot or something a little bit more pertinent that we might come across in like the news media, we're going to fall somewhere on that spectrum, and recognizing where we fall. Am I a believer? Why do I believe that? Am I against this? Why am I against this? Is kind of the first step. And for us to recognize that we show up to so many discussions in our society with pre-existing ideas, and then we make the evidence fit those ideas later on. And I think that's the fun thing about Bigfoot. Bigfoot is an example of that, and Bigfoot in our very polarized world, Bigfoot is a nonpartisan example that Republicans and Democrats can kind of agree on as an example of evidence fitting our pre-existing ideas.
Right. So, I know, Troy, that you are an expert and you've been doing some writing on really what psychologists think about fake news. And so can you kind of talk about how psychology and this idea of like people seeing Bigfoot can tie in to like the misinformation and fake news idea currently in our society?
Yeah, absolutely. And, maybe to start with, we have a little fun. I can ask a couple questions, and people who are watching at home can think of some answers to themselves. And Lizzie, I won't put you totally on the spot, but you can help me think through some of these. So my first question, and this is a famous question from psychology, is on average, highly intelligent women tend to marry less intelligent partners. And the question is why? So on average, if you take highly intelligent women, on average, they marry less intelligent partners. How come?
Oh boy, do you want me to answer?
If you want to, yeah, sure. You can take a shot.
My guess would probably be something to do with like societal expectations of women and like self-confidence in women.
Right. Yes. So that's a classic, great answer. So thank you for that answer. This question is super fun at parties, right? After a couple drinks, ask your friends this at a party. So the real answer to this is a math question, right? So on average, all highly intelligent people marry less intelligent people than themselves. So men or women or however people identify, right? So this has nothing to do about women in society, or that, an answer I often get from college students is highly intelligent women can't take intelligent men, and so therefore, there's all kinds of reasons, right, why this fits in. But the reality is there's just not enough highly intelligent people to go around, and the odds of all highly intelligent people finding someone else who's highly intelligent are just low. And so if you're highly intelligent, the average is you're going to marry someone less intelligent than you. And so, yeah. So that's just, the thing with this is like, this is a math question, but we don't see it that way, right? So this is us showing up to a question with pre-existing ideas and not recognizing the issue that really happens behind it. So here's another question, and this one's a little easier to look at than to read, but I'll read it to you. A bat and ball costs $1.10 in total. So if you add them together, they come up to $1.10. The bat costs $1 more than the ball. How much does the ball cost?
I know this has to be a trick question.
Yes.
But I want to say that the ball costs 10 cents.
Right. So that's the typical answer, which is of course incorrect, right? Because
I do it.
What we do, and this is just we hear $1.10 and then we hear $1 and we know we've got to do some kind of math. And so what do? We do a subtraction problem. $1.10 minus $1 equals 10 cents. But you got to remember the ball and the bat have to cost $1.10 together. So if the ball costs 10 cents, right, and the bat costs $1 more, that means the bat would cost $1.10. $1.10 plus 10 cents would equal $1.20. So therefore, that doesn't equal $1.10. So the real answer is 5 cents. So 5 cents plus $1.05, so that's $1 more. It's $1.05 equals $1.10, right? And when you think about it, this is a great example where of like heuristic kind of thinking. So subtraction is a rule of thinking. We know how subtraction works. We come to this thing, we just do subtraction, and we don't think deeply about it. We do this all the time in society. We make decisions like this all the time, where we have a rule of thumb and we just follow that rule of thumb. But the great example of this is like, no matter if you have a room, if I like a room of like 30 students, and we could do this as a test, and one student knew the answer, they could do the math on the board, and by the end of this problem, by the end of like 20 minutes, everyone in the room would agree. Like when I explained that to you, you weren't debating me. You were like, oh, I see how the math works, right? So this is called like a well-balanced question. Like this is a question that has logic that goes to it because it's math, where we all can agree. Now, the issue is a lot of the challenges that we face in society aren't well-balanced questions like this, right? So like, what should the minimum wage be? Well, there is no one answer to the minimum wage question. There's a lot of values. How much should someone get paid? How much should businesses pay? How much should the government force a business to pay? There's all kinds of complicated value judgments that go into those kind of questions. So anyway, I don't want to get too far off topic, but this is a great example of heuristic thinking, and it's also a great example of a question that we can always come to an agreement on, which is not really where we are often in society. So.
And Troy, can you just really define what you mean when you say heuristic?
Yes. So heuristic is a rule of thumb, and over our lives as we grow up, we learn these rules of thumb. They're shortcuts in thinking because often we don't have time, our energy or focus to think through every problem in detail, right? And so we will spend, try to think of some good examples of heuristic. So one heuristic that's out there is like a comparison heuristic. So like if you go to Walmart, they will purposefully put, this is a better example. Sorry. If you go to like a steakhouse, half the reason they have the super expensive cut of steak that costs like, $35 for the cut of steak is because when they have that cut on the menu, it makes the $25 cut of steak look cheaper.
Sure.
And they sell more $25 cuts of steak because they have the $30 cut of steak on there. And if they only had the $25 cut, they would sell less, and they would sell more of the $15 cut, right? Mm-hmm. So that's kind of we don't know that's a heuristic at work, but we're always making comparisons in our minds. So something might not seem as expensive because it's next to a thing that's even more expensive, right? And so that's and there's psychologists that literally make their careers studying these shortcuts, and most shortcuts work, and most shortcuts help us. But there's times that these shortcuts can get us in trouble because they don't represent the problems at hand, and they're a weaker kind of thinking. So that's why we need to be aware of those. So one more example of some of the psychology at work, and I want to just mention experience and how our experiences come into play, because I think that's a super important thing for who we are. Like our experiences build us. So I'm just going to read you just a little kind of story about experience. So Mr. Brown, so this is a story about Mr. Brown and Mr. Smith. Mr. Brown never picks up hitchhikers. But yesterday he made an exception. He saw someone on the road and said, I'm going to help this person out. Picked up a hitchhiker, and he was robbed by that hitchhiker. Now Mr. Smith, on the other hand, always picks up hitchhikers. He picked them up on a regular basis. Every chance he gets, he loves talking to hitchhikers, so he picks them up. Yesterday he picked up a hitchhiker, and he was robbed also. Maybe it's the same hitchhiker, I don't know. How are those experiences going to be different, right? And I think this is a great example. And I think this is kind of obvious. So if you pick up one hitchhiker and you get robbed, you're probably never going to pick up a hitchhiker again. Mm-hmm. But if you've picked up a lot of hitchhikers and you got robbed once, you're going to be like, well, I had some bad luck. Most hitchhikers I've picked up are pretty nice. And you might keep picking up hitchhikers, right? And this is not a pro-hitchhiking commercial. But I think it's a way to illustrate that when we do things and they're successful, we're more likely to do them again. And the way that we experience life pushes us in directions and help us see future experiences in new ways, right? And that's a core thing with psychology, is that the beliefs we hold become our filters for the world, for the way we see new experiences. And a lot of those beliefs are built on experience. And we really, our brains can't handle all of the sensory inputs that come at us with the people that are around us, especially in the internet age where our phones are buzzing, we have computer screens in front of us, we're constantly talking to different people. We have to find ways to filter that out. And we have to find ways to determine what I'm going to focus on and what I'm going to ignore, right? And that our belief system then, from the time we're very young, we're constantly building a belief system and how the world works. and that belief system becomes that filter, that worldview for why we think some things are important and why we ignore other things. And connected to this are our emotions and our feelings and how we interact on that kind of subconscious level with the world around us. So we end up having the key thing, right? And this is a term that I think people probably are aware of, is confirmation bias. And that's the root. This belief system is the root of confirmation bias and kind of the mechanics of skepticism, why we don't trust certain things. And no one likes to be a sucker. So
Right.
we're pretty good with like a BS detector. When people try to tell us things or fool us, it's really a tough thing to do for the most part. But what happens then with confirmation bias is that we have trouble breaking out of the beliefs we hold. Whenever we come to a problem, those beliefs that are inside of us are going to dominate. And so we have, there's two key parts of confirmation bias that you'll find in the psychology research. One is called defensive avoidance, and the other one is called selective exposure. And so defensive avoidance is where people go out of their way to avoid things that will conflict with their existing thoughts, right? So if I am a climate change skeptic and I don't believe that climate change is true, then I'm not going to go to a lecture from someone who's talking about climate change. I'm just going to avoid it because I'm not going to spend my time on it, right?
Right.
Selective exposure is when I seek out information that already agrees with my views. So maybe I'm maybe I'm a liberal and I watch MSNBC, or I'm a conservative and I only watch Fox News. And I will seek out information that already agrees with me, and I'll ignore the stuff that doesn't agree with me. And the thing is, our beliefs tend to reinforce themselves because we haven't broken out of our bubble.
Yeah. I like that little graphic you have. You have a theory and then you find evidence to support it rather than the other way around.
So many times we start with an idea first and then we fill in that evidence later. It's a really big part of our thinking.
Yeah. So, everything you just said are really good examples of like quirks in how our brains work and how our brains make decisions and understand the world. And it kind of makes it feel like our brains are broken and there's like no way out of this, And would you say that's true or no?
No, definitely not. I think there's a number of ways out of it. And I think in a lot of ways, our brains, it's amazing what we do. It is amazing how we interact. And so I would definitely not say that our brains are broken, but I do think I think we have a misconception about how our brains work and about who we are in relation to our brains, which might seem a little weird to say. So I'd like to just talk about more out of the psychology research about how our brains work. And a big part of our brains is there's a theory of dual processing, where there's two parts of our brain. And it's really more complicated than this, but this is kind of a nice way to kind of synthesize it down, is that there's two sections, right? There's a system 1, they say, and system 2. So system 1 is kind of our automatic brain. It's when I walk into a room and I see a person, system 1 is automatically making a determination about that person. How old is that person? How is that person dressed? All of these culturally loaded kind of things that come with us in society. System 1 is at work. Okay. System 2 is more of our conscious brain. It's the brain that we think of really as us. It's the brain that controls our body. So that's the two parts that are at work. And the thing that we need to realize is that really our brain isn't our brain isn't a dictatorship controlled by our consciousness. Our brain is really more like a democracy, where the different subparts of our brain are voting to do certain actions or to make certain decisions. And sometimes our conscious brain actually loses out. And a great example of this is like when you work all day, you have a tough day, you're driving home, and when I'm at work, I think to myself, you know what? I'm not going to stop for that hot fudge sundae at Dairy Queen. I need to watch what I'm eating. I'm on this diet. But as you're driving home, and there's Dairy Queen, and you're like, wow, I've had such a rough day. I'm so tired. Don't I deserve a hot fudge sundae? And you stop and give in, right? Even though your conscious brain is like, that's a bad idea, the other parts of your brain that desire the calories, that desire the feeling, you can actually literally be overridden by that part of the brain. And sometimes your conscious brain is like, I'm in, let's go, we're going to do this. But anyway, so System 1 and System 2 are always working together. And System 1 is really good. System 1 is really fast. That's the subconscious brain. It's energy efficient, and it's making decisions in the background all the time. And if we had to make a very logical cost-benefit analysis for every decision we make in society or in our day, we would never finish, right? If I was figuring out what shirt am I going to wear to work today, and I have to do like a cost-benefit chart to decide, I would never get a shirt. So at some point, you just got to have a feeling and go with it. And that's how most of our decisions are made. But the power of System 2 is that System 2 can intercede. And System 2 can override that subconscious brain. And System 2 can help us make better decisions. That's our rational thinking brain. And if you do, there's some psychologists that will do fMRI scans of people that meditate, like Buddhist meditators, and they can see the conscious brain calm the mind and override that subconscious brain. And that's sort of the power of meditation and how it can help you control your body. And it's very powerful research and argumentation about the interaction of those two minds. But I'd like to just mention one thing about reasoning in all of this, right? And that I think part of our decision is that we misunderstand the goals of reasoning. Reasoning is really a group effort. The evolutionary psychologists are showing us how reasoning is meant to happen within a group. And this is sort of counterintuitive, right? I think that I'm the Descartes kind of reasoner, that I'm gonna have the logic and I'm gonna weigh the evidence and I'm gonna come to an outcome. But what the evolutionary people are showing is that one thing we're really good at is just making up reasons. We can make up all kinds of reasons with really loose evidence. But when we evolved as humans, you've got to figure that we have about 5,000 years of human history written, roughly, right? Give or take. But we are a species that's been on Earth for about 200,000 years, 250,000 years. And so there's a whole lot of our history where we lived in small groups with family members seeking to survive in different environments. Like we weren't living, in the suburbs of Chicago, doing Zoom calls like this for most of our evolutionary history. And so our thinking evolved in groups, and our thinking kind of assumes that we have people around us to protect us and to make arguments with us. And so it's really amazing that we are really good at spotting bad arguments in others, but we're also really bad at spotting our own bad arguments. Really bad at that. And so being with other people and arguing with other people in a friendly, I don't mean argument like being mean, but just debating ideas is sort of the core of where our reasoning and thinking comes from an evolutionary perspective. There's another bias called blind spot bias that really points out, that we really lack the ability to judge our own biases, but we're really good at seeing biases in other people. And so it's important for us to be with other people as we argue. There's a book that I would recommend, and your library should definitely buy it. I love it. It's called The Enigma of Reason, and it's by psychologists Hugo Mercier and Dan Sperber. And they look at this history of reasoning and how reasoning really works. And just a quote from them, if you can indulge me for a second, give a little quote. They say, the main role of logic in reasoning, we suggest, may well be a rhetorical one. Logic helps simplify and schematize intuitive arguments, highlighting and exaggerating their force. So just to translate that kind of into more everyday speak, is that most of our arguments are intuitive, they come from our guts, and the logic fills in that evidence later, sort of the Bigfoot argument, right? Mm-hmm. But it's important to them that we do this in groups of people that we trust, because then when we're wrong, they tell us that we're wrong, and it makes the argument stronger. It makes the best ideas rise out of that group debate. And so sitting on Facebook by yourself on your phone is not a good situation for most of our reasoning capabilities, right? That's not how we're set up for decision making. And that's something we should be thinking about as a society, especially in light of how Facebook influences people's voting behavior, influences people's views on society, those kind of things, and how we live in those bubbles of just being around people that already agree with us.
And when you see somebody you disagree with, you just unfollow them.
Right, yes. Yeah. And you can only take that disagreement for so long. Or unless everyone just agrees to not talk politics on Facebook, and you just post photos of, your kids' pictures, which is where a lot of people are these days, I think. So, yeah. But
this discussion of how we make decisions it's really eye-opening for me, I know. So can you talk more about how this affects how we see fake news and misinformation?
Yeah, so excellent. Let's shift gears a little bit and just think about journalism and the media a little bit. And I'd like to differentiate a couple things. I think this is really important to me, is the difference between journalism and the journalistic enterprise and the media. What is the media? And to me, the media is really the delivery mechanism. So media would include all kinds of things that you would find out there sending us information. So everything from newspapers to like the Onion joke sites, that's the media. The media is actual how the information gets to us. Journalism, on the other hand, is a purposeful activity that reports on our world. It's a profession that has standards that has evolved over many centuries, right? If you go back to in the 1600s England, the English Civil War, 16th, 17th century, the first pseudo newspapers come into existence, and they're advocating and fighting about one side or the other, right? And we've come all the way up to the current situation of journalism that really is born out of the 20th century, reporting news, and gathering, assessing, creating, presenting information. And I worry that in our society, journalism and media get confounded, they get confused, and that hurts the overall journalistic enterprise a little bit. Just as an example, if we go back a few elections ago, so I like, this is a great example. And on May 27th of 2008, John McCain was running for president. He gave a speech in Denver, Colorado, where he talked about all kinds of things, including his views on nuclear weapons. I'd just like to read you some headlines from media outlets and journalists following that speech. Okay, so here they are. From the Washington Post, McCain calls for a new arms treaty with Russia. From the Associated Press, McCain offers plan to reduce nuclear weapons. From the Huffington Post, McCain's non-proliferation policy, it's a wolf in sheep's clothing. From National Public Radio, McCain urges change to nuclear weapons strategy. From the Coloradans, remember this was a speech in Colorado, so this is a local newspaper. War protesters interrupt McCain's Denver speech. So notice that wasn't even brought up in any of the other headlines. From Reuters, McCain edges away from Bush but seeks his help. And from Democracy Arsenal, which is a left-wing news organization, McCain's disjointed Russia policy. So this is an example, right, where he gave one speech. And what we could do as a society is print every word of that speech in the newspaper and expect readers to read every word. But we all know that's not going to happen. And especially when he gives the same speech day after day with a few different changes. So what are these outlets doing? They are making a judgment. They are deciding what they think was important from the speech, what they think is important to their readers, and what is going to be of interest to us, that's going to make us pick them over somebody else. And that's the heart of the journalistic enterprise. And I think we forget that sometimes, especially as the term fake news gets thrown around in derogatory ways, that there is no such thing as pure objectivity. I mean, I think there's an attempt for journalists to be objective and fair, and there's an attempt for honest reporting. I think that's really important. But also, the heart of journalism is making a judgment about what's important in our world. And that's why we turn to journalists, and journalists that we trust, is because we want to be able to have relevant information and not have to sift through John McCain's speech, however long that speech would be. And so this is really important. That the Society for Professional Journalists has a code of ethics, and it's very detailed. But the summary is that journalists should seek truth. Journalists should minimize harm so they don't hurt other people. Journalists should act independently so they're not influenced by one side or the other commercial interests, and they should be accountable for their actions. So if they make mistakes, they admit those mistakes, and they correct errors and those kind of things. And that's the core of what journalism is. And I think sometimes we have the talking heads out there that get in the way and confuse us about journalism, and even today, I think there's some amazing reporting being done, and I think everyone uses journalism sometimes as their punching bag because it's easy, and not recognize some of the great work that's happening.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. And it seems like maybe also pundits are part of the problem too, because people think that they're journalists, but they're really just giving opinion as well. So it does seem like journalism is really more of a process than we really realize, when we're just reading the newspaper or watching the news.
Yeah, there's a famous saying about journalists that for every news, this may be less true as newsrooms are shrinking in the current news environment. But it used to be the saying that there's more editors than there are reporters in a newsroom, and that's the thing I think also we don't recognize in real journalism. The best journalism we have that's out there. A reporter does reporting, but there's fact checkers and there's copy editors. There's ombudsmen that work for newspapers who check, who represent the reading public, right? So that each story before it comes to us, like something that goes through the Tribune or the New York Times or the Washington Post or the LA Times, there's many hands that touch that story before it actually reaches their website or the printed page. You had mentioned the pundits, and I do think that really we are suffering the failure of the 24-hour cable news experiment that started in the late 80s and really blew up in the 90s and early 2000s. In the beginning, we thought we're going to have CNN and this like nonstop news, and CNN was the first. And what they found is that people got bored with news eventually, unless there's breaking news. That's why now everything is breaking news. Breaking news. And the thing that people liked were the debates. So you'd have someone from the left and someone from the right, and then they would fight each other. Originally, like Crossfire on CNN was like the discovery of that. And then you had the whole networks break off. Like Fox News is a whole one side of pundits, and you could have MSNBC like on the whole other side of pundits. And I think that failure where you have pundits who aren't actually doing journalism, they're really advocating for a belief system, advocating for a political party. Those pundits have become confused for journalism. And even in the newspapers, right, you have the editorial page. The editorial page is very separate from the news reporting page. The newsroom does not talk to the editorial staff. At least traditionally it shouldn't. There's like a wall so that the news is not influenced by editorial. And we can debate how well that's been done. I think there's a lot of history behind that, and some papers have failed and some organizations are better than others. But at least at the heart of journalism is that separation. And I think we've seen with the explosion of cable news, that's probably been made worse by social media, been made worse by the internet explosion. We've lost track of who is journalist doing reporting and who is a pundit speaking on behalf of a political party. I would say that there are some pressures and some limits right now on journalism. Right now, there is a battle for attention that's happening, and local news is dying, and I think that's a tragedy. I attend my local community college's board of trustees meeting every month, and there was a time where we would have 2 or 3 reporters from local papers at that meeting covering what was happening. Every school board had that. Now we have none, unless there's some big fight that they know about in advance. A paper might send somebody. And that's true for think of like the water reclamation district, think of your park district meetings, think of your, all of that used to be covered by local media, and that's gone. And part of that just is like the funding mechanism has fallen away. Right now they're fighting for attention. It's easy to get the New York Times, as it used to be. It'd be your local paper is all you had. Now I can get global news at the click of a button on my phone. So I think we see certain dominant narratives that carry through all the media, and that gets carried through the major news outlets. The irony is local papers are dying, but this is one of the best times ever for Fox. It's making breaking records in viewership every week. For the New York Times, it's finally turning a profit, doing really well. The Washington Post. But the local papers are dying. At the same time, you have the Tribune that's really on life support, about to collapse, and the LA Times is right there with them. And so I think there's limited resources and limited budgets to support these things, and so it's tough. It's a tough time to be in the news, that's for sure.
Yeah, yeah, that's the truth. So it's the industry is undergoing these really major changes. For better or for worse. Mostly, it sounds like for worse, and it sounds like it's really concerning as far as us being able to trust the news and what we're seeing, given all this. So, what do you think?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think we should be worried. First off, I think we should care about what's happening, and I think if you are in a position where you have income to support news media, I think you should do it. And whether it's a subscription to the Tribune, maybe a donation to Chicago Public Radio, wherever you Sun-Times, local papers, I think that's important. Our society is built on this kind of Enlightenment idea. It goes back probably to Francis Bacon, you could say, or probably before, where if we have public discourse, if we debate ideas, and we agree that the best ideas will live on and the worst ideas will go away, and we will find compromise, then our society will be better for it. And things like libraries have been, held up as examples of places where ideas come and are debated. Schools where we share ideas, but media, government, like these are institutions that uphold democracy and where ideas are shared. And so I worry these days in this polarized media environment, in this environment where there's a benefit to be polarized, benefit by politicians as we self-select our way into very kind of segregated like congressional districts, right? We've gerrymandered ourselves, where politicians benefit by being polarized. And now you have news media that also benefits by being polarized. So they're the conservative media, they're the liberal media. I worry that we're not having honest debate and we're not seeking compromise, right? We're not seeking the best answers. And
Right.
it becomes even more problematic when you throw in the idea of fake news. So we're in a media environment, an information environment. It's not just media, but through social media and how we consume information, where fake news really has had a big impact, and I think there's a lot of evidence for that. And I think there's different types of fake news that's out there that we should be aware of, right? So there's some things that are just completely fabricated, and we're seeing evidence. Just this week, there was a report from U.S. intelligence agencies and from I think Microsoft saying how Russia and China and Iran are really pushing fake news, trying to hack political campaigns and trying to really push the discussion in unhealthy ways. So fabricated stories that purposefully mislead the public is one issue for sure.
And they can sound really real.
Yes, right. And sometimes the best of them, and I don't mean the best, I mean the ones that seem to be most effective, are the ones that play on our preconceived fears, right? That push fears out there that we already hold. So some of it is on us. I mean, it's all on us. Like it's our ability to recognize those fears and how we're being played is a key part of it. There's some things that are just clickbait, that are crazy headlines that they want to just get you to open up their website so they can sell ads to you. And there's some like reporting that is from a kind of a viewpoint, like a standpoint. So for instance, you could take like The Nation is a left-wing newspaper, or the National Review is like a right-wing conservative publication, and those have been around for hundreds of years, not hundreds, but over 90 years for The Nation, I think, and at least from the 60s for National Review. And that isn't the same as like the fabricated news stories, but it also does come from a political kind of bias, and we should recognize that. But that's also being spread and then pulling us further apart. And of course, there are some like satire websites. The Onion is fun, those kind of things. That's
Yeah.
a little less troublesome, a little more fun. But those are also things that are out there that kind of are in that fake news category.
People don't always know that the Onion is fake. They'll share a link thinking it's real.
Right. Yes.
Yeah,
And especially if people don't get the satire, or other countries, there's a couple of famous examples where the Chinese news agency reported on some Onion articles because they didn't get the satire.
Oh no, yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's always good. But like, so ultimately, I think it does come back to us. It comes back to us and our identities. Our identities connect us into fake news, and again, it's that worldview on what we think is important and what we think is not important, and why we would spread that. Beliefs tie us to the information that we read and that we value. And a great example is why historically have we had debates about the theory of evolution, but we haven't had debates about the theory of gravity. In terms of scientific knowledge, our theory of evolution is about 1,000 more times developed. That might be an exaggeration, but it's much more developed than what we know about gravity. But because evolution threatens a certain viewpoint of religion, specifically the Christian story of Genesis, that has been a fire point about science. We debate evolution. Is evolution real? How does that fit in with our religious views? But we don't fight about gravity, right? Even though gravity we know a lot less about. And there's no debates about wholly falling, because we largely just don't care. We see gravity work, and as long as it works, we're happy. And so that's another great example of how beliefs supercharge those kind of discussions, and what we think is important, what we don't think is important. There's a theory called identity protective cognition. This is from the psychology research. This is from Dan Kahan from Yale University. He says this is the tendency to selectively credit and discredit evidence in patterns that reflect people's commitment to competing cultural groups. So this is that kind of tribal. If I'm a Republican, I think one thing. If I'm a Democrat, I think another thing, right? So when it comes to climate change, right when you put Al Gore's picture up there saying one thing, there's certain people that are going to be like, oh, Al Gore says it, I love it, I'm in on it. And there's another group of people that are going to be like, Al Gore, leave me out. I don't trust him. And that that bias comes in. Doesn't matter what they actually say. And the core of that is we're protecting our identities, because this is my group. I want to win. It's like Cubs versus Sox, but on a more serious level, right? This is Republicans versus Democrats, and it's how we vote, how we spend money, how we make decisions as a society. And it's complicated. There's a lot of evidence. There's evidence for what's known as the rebound effect. So sometimes when you argue with someone who thinks differently of you, what you actually do is make them more ingrained in their views against you, because you're forcing them to think through their views and make their views stronger. So instead of you actually changing somebody's mind, you actually get them to rebound back stronger against you from where they started. It's kind of a backfire. So just simply saying the way that we solve this is better facts, better information, isn't actually true a lot of the times. Right now, what I would say is we don't lack facts. We don't lack information. I think a lot of times we lack a cohesive or shared goal of compromise and creating an understanding we can all live with. Just one final thing I'll say is an idea about motivated reasoning, or at least one final thing along these lines. Motivated reasoning is that when we go out to learn things, we often go to, we sit down at Google, we do a search. We often start by trying to confirm what we already know instead of disconfirming it. We would be better thinkers if we tried to disconfirm our thoughts. And if we couldn't disconfirm them, that means our thoughts are strong, and that thought stays stronger. But instead, we look to confirm first. You could do both. You could confirm and disconfirm. But mostly what happens is I sit down and search. I find that one thing I agree with, and then I'm done, because I've got that, yes, thumbs up. I've got my evidence, and I move on. Yeah. I move on from there.
Yeah. Okay. So, we've talked a lot about these various biases that affect our brains and the way we see the world. We've talked a lot about the problems of journalism, the problems of social media, that system 1 and 2 thinking, and just, given all of that, and given that there is this pervasive problem of polarization and misinformation, what are some things we can do that can help us to make better choices and to understand the world better, for ourselves and our community? Yeah,
and I definitely don't have all the answers, that's for sure. But I have, of course, right, of course. But I have some thoughts, and I have some things that I think move us in some good directions, I hope. And for us librarians, I think the term that we would love everybody to know is information literacy. To be information literate is to be very knowledgeable and skillful at finding, interpreting, using information, right? So there's a few things I think that we can know better. And I think number one is starting with ourselves, to be reflective. And a lot of researchers are saying this in all different fields, is that we should really be self-aware. Where do my beliefs come from? What are the things in my life that have helped me come to my worldview? Whether it's where I was born, my social class, my race, my religion. What are the things that push me to think a certain way? And are there problems with that? Are there other people different from me that I should reach out to, right? So that's one thing. Another thing is, like, as we are living this social media life that we live, and there's some great benefits from social media. There's many people in my life that I would not be in touch with if it wasn't for Facebook. So, I'm not someone that says, let's just never touch it again. But also, when you're using it, I think a good habit that you can be in is to just recognize anytime you hit a strong emotion. So if something makes you angry, if something makes you laugh, if something makes you happy, that should be a red flag. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad, but you should note, like, I'm now emotionally charged. Why do I want to share this? So Donald Trump has made me happy. Everyone should know this. Or Donald Trump has made me super angry. I'm going to share this. And you should catch yourself and say, why? Is this something that I should share? Is there information under this that I trust? Are there counter arguments? So before you share angry, you should step back and think for a second.
And I just want to say that's something that's happened to me. I'll see something on Facebook, I'll get really mad, and I'll stop myself and say, I better fact check this, and I'll just Google it. And 100% of the time, it's more complicated than what I'm saying.
Yes, always more, and especially the people that don't read the article, they just share headlines. You know it's more complicated than any headline can ever be, right? There's way more behind it. And I think, one thing that I think is really important is that, to go back to that idea about how our evolutionary brain works, right, is that we aren't intended to be reasoning all by ourselves. So talk to other people. Be in real communication with people. Do not reason alone, I think, is an important thing. And I think that's why, unfortunately, a lot of colleges now, everyone's working online. I think we miss that in the classroom, that classroom exchange of actually being with other humans and talking about ideas. We really can't replace it. It really is powerful, and it really is important. Groups of people make decisions better together, and those groups that are diverse, trusted people with diverse thought is the most powerful thing that we can have in decision making, because then you cover a lot of ground. You don't fall for the traps of biases of groupthink, right? And you can get the good ideas and let those good ideas rise to the top. And I think that plays to the best in our reasoning is when we work together. I think there's a few ideas that we should always keep at heart, and I think especially for those of us that are teaching and in libraries. One is the idea of intellectual humility. And that's just a simple idea. I took this from a researcher named Mark Leary from Duke University. And it's just the idea that you might be wrong. That you hold ideas that some of them are right and some of them are going to be wrong. And that part of your job should be to exchange ideas with others and figure out which ideas you hold aren't quite right that we can change. So we need to be humble with our ideas and not just assume we're right and we're gonna go to it. It's about winning the debate, not about being right? Like we need to focus on truth, not just winning.
And to know that it's okay to change your mind.
Yes.
I do think that people like, oh, I had this belief and I'm ashamed to admit I was wrong. And I don't think that should be shameful.
Right, absolutely. Some of in my library, and you've probably seen this too, some of the most powerful moments that I've ever seen working with students is when they come in thinking one thing and they read something they've never thought before. They've come across an idea that they've never been exposed to, and they change their mind. And it's really kind of the moments that I think all of us in kind of the educational sphere kind of live for, because that's the power of new ideas. And I think it's so great when that happens. Unfortunately, it doesn't happen as much as we might like it to happen. Another idea is information empathy. And this is an idea that I kind of put together through a few different people. But it's to really try to honestly understand other people. So if someone disagrees with you, don't start at the standpoint where they're wrong, evil people out to destroy democracy. Start from the standpoint of, I want to understand why they think what they think. They've come to this point. Why is that? How can I understand that? Be empathetic to them to understand opposing viewpoints. It doesn't mean that you're going to agree with them. You still may not. but you might also be more likely to treat them as humans, right? More likely to call them names, or less likely to call them names, and really try to get to a point of understanding where even if you're not totally in agreement, you get where they're coming from. Sometimes I feel like that's really missed right now in some of the debates, especially when I hear certain friends of mine talk about like some of the like Black Lives Matter movement, and I think, have you really honestly tried to understand why they are where they are? And I'm sure that's true for both sides, right? Like people that are on the other side of the debate, or like, you know, it's easy to vilify certain maybe Trump supporters. Why are they where they are? How can we understand how they got there?
Well, and yeah, understanding, you know, you were saying just at the very beginning of this talk about how experience informs our worldview. If you can understand that people have had different experiences and what those experiences are, you can understand where they're coming from. And then you can talk to them in a really different way.
Right, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I think that we need to recognize that critical thinking is a skill, that thinking about why we got to a certain point, how we can hold multiple ideas at the same time that are contradictory. You know, it's like, if you want to be a runner, what do? You go out and run. You get better at running. You get yourself in shape. Our critical thinking is the same way. So if we always read the same things, if we always follow the same sources, then we're not really thinking critically. We're not really testing out those muscles. But we need to get out, think about the approach of de-biasing, to seek multiple views, think about alternatives. So that's a great exercise that I know happens in a lot of classrooms, where you want to try to just expose all of the different viewpoints on one topic and try to understand all the biases that can exist, and then see what's the strongest thought that exists. So start from a standpoint of, I don't care what I really think right now. I just want to see how many different viewpoints are out there and capture them all and know about them. Related to this is an idea from Stanford. There's a history group at Stanford, and it's so great. They did this research about fact checkers. And often when we look at sources, when like most of us teach students to evaluate a source, I'm going to look at a source on whatever topic. Is it good or is it bad? We spend a lot of time on that one source, and we try to make a judgment about that source. But what fact checkers do is they don't spend time on one source. They take that one source and they go read 5 other things on the same topic, and they compare what all of them say. And they use those other sources then to make a judgment. So instead of doing a deep dive into one source, they read broadly, laterally. So that's called lateral reading. And you know, you still need some good sources to read. You know, you can't just read all junky sources. But looking broadly across a topic is really important, and that helps you see those multiple perspectives and that multiple view. And I think the more that we can get out of our bubbles, the more that we can have friends that think differently than us. Some of my most valued friends, and they may not believe me, on Facebook are the people who disagree with me, who that when I post something, they will put up the counter argument and help me see that way. And I have a very high tolerance for people that disagree with me. Now, not everyone does that. I enjoy the debate. I like to know their thoughts, and I try not to be. I'm not mean about it. I just want to know, okay, why do you think this? And that helps me then broaden my thinking and recognize weaknesses in my thinking, and then importantly recognize where I might be wrong. I would just also say that when we sit down and use Google, searching to disprove our beliefs, I think is important. Also, throwing the word debunk into your search sometimes is important. So how would you debunk your own search? How do you debunk your own ideas? I think that's a way that we could try. If you get that, you find that source and it just doesn't quite feel right, that's where you need to do a little bit of searching and use that and debunk it and see where they might be wrong.
Yeah. Well, you know, thanks, Troy, for all of this. This is great information. And I think, you know, if I have one major takeaway, it would be, you know, when I'm reading an article or when I'm on Facebook and when I'm kind of considering the news, it would be to stop and try to think about what I'm reading, the point of view, you know, of where it's coming from, and try to think, you know, about the other potential points of view, like around that piece of information. If there was one piece of advice that you'd want to leave us with, you know, what would you say that would be?
Well, I think you've summarized it really well. The one key thing I would add, just to bring us back to Bigfoot, is that we should always start with ourselves and be reflective of our own worldview and where we come from. Because that's the Bigfoot lesson to all of this, right? Is that Bigfoot isn't real, but the reason people see Bigfoot is because Bigfoot's hiding in their head. And so when something weird happens, they say, oh, I just saw Bigfoot. And I think that that happens to us all the time, right? Is that we deceive ourselves. we overemphasize that we're always right and that our ideas must be the only ideas that are great for society. And so that I would say exactly what you said, that recognize all the different views, try to not hold on to them too tightly, but also recognize how your views have come to be and where the weaknesses in your views might exist. And I think that would go a long ways in our society for all of us to be a little bit better democracy, where we really debate ideas and seek compromise together, not just seek to win the next election. Mm-hmm. And thank you for this opportunity. This was fun. I hope it was an information overload for everybody.
It's a lot of good information. I think people will really enjoy it. So thank you very much, everybody, for watching.
And Lizzie, if I could just throw out there, I'm going to post on here my email address. I'd be happy to answer any emails, and also my Twitter account. I'd be happy to connect with people online. So
thanks, Troy. That's really nice. Thanks very much. All right. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye. Thanks.